the news you need. WRNN, your regional news network.
Good evening. I'm Richard French, and this is The Big Story. America was founded on the principle of equality for everyone, including a solid educational foundation for every child. Bilingual education programs were established in the 1960s to make sure that immigrants did not get left behind academically. But studies now are coming out that show that these bilingual classes are not as successful as once thought. Tonight, we want to know if you think the bilingual education system is detrimental to the learning progress of non-native speakers, or do you think a slower immersion into the English language is a better way for children to assimilate into the American culture? Welcome back. Tonight we are talking about the bilingual education system in America. 2 years ago, California voters decided to end bilingual classes, and immigrant children test scores are on the rise, confounding many experts. Parents as well as educators now across the nation are beginning to question the effectiveness of native language instruction. Tonight, we want to know how you feel about bilingual education. You can give us a call if you haven't already. 888-RNN chat. We'll open up some extra phone lines. We want to hear what you have to say. Well, this is taking place certainly in California right now. It is more than being proposed right now on the national level. Certainly in New York, many people have been posed the question, do you think it should be eliminated in New York? And certainly New Jersey and Connecticut will not be far behind. We want to welcome our guest to the program here tonight in just a second. But first, let's take a look at the history of this very controversial education system in our country. And between 1920 and 1960, there was English immersion, and is popularly called the sink or swim policy. Changed in 1968. In 68, Bilingual Education Act recognized the educational disadvantage that were faced by non-English speaking students. And in 1963, going back a little bit, success of bilingual program for Cuban refugees in Florida inspired similar programs. Fast forward here a little bit, in '74, Congress passed the Equal Educational Opportunity Act, ruling that identical education does not constitute equal education. What this really meant, quite simply, was, you know what? Just because it's equal education, you've got to provide here different languages, and you have to give these kids the equal chances. In '67, Governor Ronald Reagan here, remember, obviously Republican governor, he signed the bill eliminating English-only instructional mandate. And in '98, under Proposition 227 moving forward, 1.4 million students are mainstreamed into classes after 1 year of English instruction. Interesting to note here, Republican governor in California at the time, this was very popular in the '60s here. This was something that would basically equal out the playing field. And if you also know, we are now in the age where we're reanalyzing a lot of these beliefs. Welfare was reformed here. Most people look back and say it was a success. Now the issue of bilingual education. Should it be left as it is, or should we change it? California, we're going to be talking about successes and or failures of ending the bilingual educational system, and get to your phone calls in just a second. I want to now welcome our guest, and we are now joined by the co-author of Proposition 227 and the chairman of English for Children, Ron Unz, who you saw in that piece earlier. In addition to Mr. Unz, we're also joined by the director of the Education and Child Welfare Program for the Reason Public Policy Institute, Lisa Snell, who joins us on the phone line. Thank you, both of you, for joining me this evening.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
It's an interesting debate, and I guess as we're sitting here in 2000, if we went back in '96, '97 to have this debate, I guess, Mr. Unz, you would have been labeled as pretty arch-conservative here without the consideration of the children in mind. Now that you see some of the results that have come out of California, do you feel vindicated in any way?
Well, yeah, I think I feel vindicated, and I think the vast majority of Californians who voted for the measure also feel vindicated. I really think there never was much support for native language instruction among any groups in the broad public, and it was kept in place simply because a very small number of people worked in the bilingual education industry and wanted to keep the program going.
Lisa, let me ask you, were you surprised by some of the results, and these were taken by nonpartisan groups here, as to how these children have performed in the last couple of years out of California, since it was basically put in a sink or swim policy after a year of transition?
No, not surprised at all. In fact, smaller pilot programs indicate that when children are immersed in English only, that their test scores tend to go up. So there were other, even before Proposition 227, there were obviously other research that indicated that that program worked well for immigrant children.
So let me ask you, Lisa, do you think that there still is a role here for a bilingual education, or do you think the system needs to be changed and modified? We see obviously what happened in California. It's been discussed that in New York and other states here, they could soon be following the lead of California. Should it stay as status quo, or should it be changed?
Well, I think one of the things that needs to be changed is, in general, the idea that school districts are mandated to have a specific program. And in many cases with bilingual education in New York, and certainly the way it was before in California, bilingual education was the only way. And so there was only one choice. And I think that's what needs to be changed, where there's mandates. Now, most of the evidence points to the fact that bilingual education doesn't work. And I think certainly what's happened in California, and also the other study that was recently released in New York, supports the idea that students that are taught in English, whether it's English immersion or English as a second language classes that aren't bilingual, tend to be performing better. So I think as a national trend, we tend to see people replicate programs that work, and so moving away from bilingual education will probably happen.
But do you still feel there is a role here for bilingual education, or do you think that it should be strictly an immersion type of educational system?
Well, I don't think that you can mandate and make everyone everywhere have to go to an English-only program at the state level. I mean, I think that there has to be room for some local decision-making, but on the other hand, most bilingual education programs are state mandates, and certainly when you have the initiative process, the people themselves are mandating their choice on what they think works.